You know, between 1918 and 1920, a plague just tore across the globe. It infected 1 out of every 3 people on the entire planet and killed more people in just 2 years than the Great War did in 4. And the crazy part, for decades, this massive catastrophe was, well, it was almost completely forgotten. This is the story of the 1918 flu.
Okay, so first things first, let's talk about the name. We almost always call it the Spanish flu. But here's the thing, that name is completely wrong. It's a historical mistake, really, born out of the propaganda and just the sheer chaos of a world at war.
So during World War I, the countries that were fighting, the US, Britain, Germany, they all had wartime censors. You can't have headlines saying deadly flu wiping out our troops, right? That's terrible for morale. So they suppressed the news. But Spain was neutral. Their press was free to report exactly what was happening, creating this totally false impression that Spain was the epicenter. In reality, the fire was already burning all over the world.
So, now that we've debunked the name, the real mystery begins. Where did this killer virus actually come from? It's like a historical whodunit. Historians and scientists have chased down several compelling leads, but to this day, the case remains cold.
All right, our first major lead takes us surprisingly to the American heartland. A lot of evidence suggests the pandemic's first sparks might have ignited in rural Kansas, and from there it spread like wildfire as American soldiers got ready for war.
And this is where you can really see how the war effort basically became the engine for this virus. The first officially recorded case was an Army cook at Camp Funston, this massive training base. Just days later, hundreds of soldiers were sick. With troops constantly moving across the country and then over to Europe, you've just created the perfect super spreader network.
But hold on, there's another really compelling theory out there. It suggests the virus wasn't an American import at all. Instead, it might have been forged in the absolutely hellish conditions of the Great War's front lines in Europe.
And this is a pretty terrifying thought. As early as 1916, there were outbreaks of this weird deadly respiratory illness at a massive British camp in Etaples, France. The camp was the perfect storm. Overcrowded, filled with stressed, weakened soldiers, and packed in with pigs and poultry, a literal viral mixing bowl for a new flu strain to mutate into something, well, into a killer.
Okay, so what if it wasn't the US and it wasn't Europe? Our third hypothesis takes us even further east, suggesting the virus might have come from China and traveled to Europe with Chinese laborers who were recruited for the war effort.
See, back in 1917, a very similar illness was reported right where these laborers were being recruited, so it's possible they carried it to Europe. But here's where it gets really interesting. The counterargument is that China itself had a pretty mild pandemic. So what does that mean? Did they already have some kind of immunity from an earlier version of the virus? It's a huge clue, but the case is still wide open.
So no matter where it started, this virus soon launched a full-on global assault. But it didn't just hit all at once. Nope. It came in a series of, well, just devastating waves.
That first wave in early 1918, it was contagious, sure, but it mostly felt like a really bad flu season. People weren't panicking, yet. But then, in the fall of that year, the second wave hit, and that was the real killer. The virus came back, but it had mutated. It was terrifyingly lethal, causing most of the deaths in just a few short months, followed by deadly aftershocks in 1919 and 1920.
And this is maybe one of the most uniquely terrifying things about this virus. You see, most of the time, the flu follows what we call a U-shaped curve. It's hardest on the very young and the very old. But this thing, it had this bizarre W shape. Its deadliest peak was among perfectly healthy young adults, people from 20 to 40 years old. The leading theory is that their super strong immune systems went into overdrive, a cytokine storm, and basically turned their own defenses against their bodies.
The way people died was just horrifying. Their lungs would fill with fluid so fast they would literally drown. And this lack of oxygen caused something called heliotrope cyanosis. It turned their skin this dark, purplish blue color. It was so distinctive, so terrifying, that the pandemic earned another nickname, the Purple Death.
I mean, this virus became so much a part of everyday life that it even wormed its way into children's rhymes. This skipping rope rhyme, it's just this haunting artifact that shows how a global killer became a casual part of a kid's world.
So, what was the final bill? What was the staggering toll of this pandemic? The numbers, honestly, are almost impossible to wrap your head around. They dwarf even the casualties of the war that had just ended.
It's estimated that the virus infected 500 million people. Let that sink in for a second. At the time, that was more than the entire population of North and South America combined.
To put it another way, just imagine 1 out of every 3 people you know, your family, your friends, your coworkers, getting sick. That was the reality back in 1918.
And the number of deaths was just catastrophic. Because record keeping was so spotty back then, the estimates are all over the place. From a conservative 17 million all the way up to a staggering 100 million people. Even if you take the lowest number, that means the flu killed more people than all of World War I.
And the thing is, the virus didn't hit everywhere equally. Its wrath was incredibly uneven. In India, it killed around 5% of the entire population. In Western Samoa, it was far worse. 22% of the population died in just 2 months. Think about that. Entire villages in Alaska were just wiped off the map. No corner of the globe was safe.
Which brings up a really strange question, right? With a death toll of this magnitude, how on earth could something so catastrophic just fade from our collective memory for so long?
Well, it turns out a perfect storm of factors basically conspired to bury its memory. The biggest one was that it was totally overshadowed by the end of World War I. To a grieving public, the death of a young man from the flu and the death of a young man in the trenches, it all just blurred together into this one giant, overwhelming wave of loss. The pandemic also burned out so fast that by the time the world could catch its breath, it was already over.
And that leads us to one final, and honestly, probably the most chilling question of all. The pandemic faded from the headlines, sure, but what happened to the actual virus?
The terrifying answer is it never really went away. It just went into circulation, mutating, evolving. It became the direct ancestor of almost every single seasonal and pandemic H1N1 flu that followed it. So, in a very real sense, the ghost of 1918 is still with us. It's a permanent, unseen part of our world.